Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Russell Brinegar. He grew up on the Space Coast in Titusville, Florida. He was lucky enough to have witnessed the Saturn V rocket launches of the Apollo moon missions and enjoyed a childhood without computers or iPhones. In 1973, he joined the Army and became a gunner on the 81mm mortar crew. Following this experience, he has been an anti-military advocate to the present day. For the first 54 years of his life, he ascribed to the predominant scientific paradigm of physicalism, or material reductionism, in which consciousness is considered a byproduct of the brain, and when the brain dies, consciousness is forever extinguished. In August of 2009, he suffered a major heart attack and near-death experience, which revealed the multidimensional nature of reality. This experience prompted several years of research into NDEs, or near-death experiences, and all aspects of the paranormal, including UFO phenomenon, which resulted in the publishing of his 2016 titled book, Overlords of the Singularity, The Manipulation of Humankind by Hidden UFO Intelligences and the Quest for Transcendence. Russell, welcome. How are you tonight?
Great. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks so much. I've been looking forward to it. Before we get started tonight, I want to thank our sponsor, C60 Purple Power. I have been taking C60 for a little over a week, and I already feel amazing. I have increased energy, better sleep, less aches and pains, and an extraordinary sense of well-being just after a few days. And from what I hear, after 30 days, you will feel the full effects of this amazing product. C60 is characterized as a free radical sponge with an antioxidant efficiency several hundredfold higher than conventional antioxidants. C60 may be the most powerful antioxidant yet known. Not only can it help maximize the efficiency of cells in producing energy, but it may also provide cellular protection against many toxic environmental factors. It also helps reduce inflammation in the body by neutralizing oxidative radicals. Take back control of your health and begin your C60 Purple Power journey today. Visit c60purplepower.com or click the link in the description. Use coupon code KNOWLEDGE10 to receive 10% off your order plus free shipping. That's c60purplepower.com. Now, Russell, the more I learn about this phenomenon, UFO, ETs, paranormal consciousness, the more I come to know that all these fields are connected in profound ways, and there's most likely an entire universe of life just beyond the spectrum of our vision. And you've experienced this firsthand, and it pushed you to explore the aspects of this phenomenon. But tonight, before we get started, I want to get a little bit more about your background and what led you to write your book.
Okay, well, as I mentioned in the bio, I grew up on the Space Coast in Titusville, Florida, and was fortunate enough to watch all the Apollo rockets go off to the moon. And as a child, I was a science fiction advocate, a fan. I collected 1962 Mars Attacks cards, and this was back in the days when kids were packs of feral dogs. I had my friends come to the door every day and ask if I could come out to play. We didn't have iPhones or anything like that. So we built forts in the woods and collected bubblegum cards and rode skateboards, which were 2x4s with metal skates nailed to the bottom of it, and water skied behind cars, and did all kinds of stuff that probably would have curled the hair of our parents had they known what we were up to. But in 1973, I graduated from high school and went right into the Army for a 2-year period. And it sort of hit me right away what was going on with that I was being, now this is an 18-year-old mind at the time. The way I looked at it, they were training me to be a killing robot to go into foreign countries and murder strangers that I don't even know for somebody else's purposes. So it really sort of traumatized me. I got out on what's called a Chapter 5 expeditious discharge, inability to adjust to military service, and basically hitchhiked the entire country for about 3 years. Now, during this period of time, I learned to enjoy living without money, and I ran into the Hare Krishna temples all over the United States, and the Rainbow Family. It's a group of people who lived on the road that met in a state forest every year. But what I summed up real quick was when you're 20 or 21 years old and you're hitchhiking around the country, you're a young, adventurous nomad. But I projected that into 20 years, and I didn't want to become an old bum. So I made my way back home. When I went into the Army, my family moved to Bloomington, Indiana, and that's where they are today, and that's where I've stayed here in Indiana ever since. And not having a college education at that time, you pretty much have a choice between minimum wage jobs and sales. So I wanted to make pretty good money, so I went into sales, and I've sold about everything from used cars to vacuum cleaners to just everything, accident insurance, you name it. And during this period of time, it lasted about a decade and a half. I always considered myself an agnostic. I accepted the scientific paradigm, and I never really thought about UFOs much except for a science fiction aspect, because the Condon report in 1969 that poo-pooed UFOs came out when I was about 14 years old. And at the time, I remember my dad and other parents were saying, well, I guess they're not real, so I just kind of wrote it off. And I take a minute to explain the mindset that I was in prior to this experience that I had. Well, first of all, after the 15 years of sales, I really began getting uncomfortable with commission sales because I would have like anxiety on Sunday evening, wondering if I was going to blank that week, which means, you're not going to sell anything. And straight commission it really induces anxiety disorders more than anything else. And I just was uncomfortable with the way I interacted with humanity at large. Sort of was looking at them like, in these cartoons where somebody just turns into a cooked turkey all of a sudden. I was tired of just trying to get their signatures on a contract for personal gain. So I wound up going to college. I entered it at 37 and graduated at 42 with a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy. And my goal was to work for 20 years in the second career and retire, which I did. But my mindset prior to August of 2009, when I had my heart incident, was as far as UFOs go, I was a skeptic. You can't get here from there. The distances are too far. They're not going to come here and crash in the desert. They're not going to come here just to scribble messages in cornfields, and just very much in the measurement fallacy. If you can't measure it or reproduce it, then it doesn't exist. And that's commonly referred to as the measurement fallacy. I was a physicalist, a material reductionist, but I wasn't 100% convinced that that was all there was to reality. So one day, August 18th in 2009, I went home to mow my grass, and opened up the garage door and started the lawnmower and walked about 15 feet. And I just got this wave of fatigue that came over me. And I thought at first that I might be dehydrated. So I went into the house and I got a glass of water. And then when I came back out, I started the mower up again like a dummy and went another 20 feet. And that same feeling came back to me only 100-fold. And it just hit me. I knew what was happening. I was having a heart attack. So I was kind of surprised at my own reaction because I didn't feel any fear that I was about to die in my yard. And instead, I just started going around in circles like a dog when he's looking for a place to do his business, because I didn't want somebody to find me with a bloody head from the gravel. So I wanted to lay down in a nice section of grass. And what happened, which changed my paradigm, was that I was suddenly, there was no traffic sounds, no bird sounds. It's almost like somebody just took the dimmer switch on reality a little bit. And I would come to know this later on as the Oz factor. Jenny Randall's coined that term. And I was encountered with several etheric beings, one of which was a transcended version of myself, and the others were loved ones that I had relationships with here on Earth. And the surprising factor was that some of the people that were there with me were still living lives here on Earth. And I would come to understand this later on through studying quantum mechanics and the phenomena of superposition, where like an electron can be a measured particle, but at the same time it's connected to a probability field. And I kind of feel like that's what we are. But I didn't know it at the time, but this is a very common phenomenon, near-death experiences, where you're given a choice. It's like the beings on the other side of the veil were very welcoming and very friendly. And it's like, you know, you can transition right now if you want to. It was sort of like that same feeling you get when you wake up from a dream in the morning. It's like, oh yeah, there's this other reality that I forgot all about. And when you approach the veil and you're about to pass, that's exactly the feeling that you get. It's like, oh, it's like a remembrance. There's this whole other reality on the other side of the veil. So I thought about it for a few minutes, and or just for a few seconds, actually. It probably felt like a few minutes. But I thought, okay, now it's cool. I know that there is life on the other side, that there's a lot going on the other side of the veil. And I'd be interested in living life here in the physical just a little bit longer with this knowledge, you know. So I went inside and I grabbed my keys and I drove myself to the hospital. And to make a long story short, they shipped me up to Muncie, which is about an hour away, and the doctors were there ready to do a quadruple bypass operation. And that kind of freaked me out because that's the crab cracker, you know, where they saw your sternum in half and crank you open. And I said, is there any alternative to this? And they went, well, we can try a couple of stents on the occluded arteries on the back of your heart, but we need to know, like within the next 30 seconds, what you want to do. It's less invasive and we can try it if you want to. So I said, well, let's go with the stents. And so I actually was under conscious sedation, and there was a doctor above me with little goggles on, and I was able to watch it on the monitor. And when he came up to the occluded article, it was almost like a garden hose that you twisted. I mean, it was completely cut off. And it was like a little piece of Chinese handcuffs going up there. And I really thought the artery was going to break. But when he turned it and it expanded, it popped the artery right open. So he did 2 of those. And strangely, when I was having this encounter with otherworldly beings that were very familiar with me, it was almost like the universe operates like Google. You can, it's like I Googled Russ is dying into the universe, and then associated links started popping up in waves, starting with the most closely associated first. And one of the entities that showed up was a woman that I had actually broken up with a year previously. And when they rolled me out from getting the stents, guess who was there? She was there with tears rolling down her face. Her mascara was running. And as they wheeled me past to check me in, I spent one night in the hospital. I said, I'm going to fix this. So a month later, her name is Julie. Julie and I flew to Las Vegas and were married by Dracula, or a Dracula impersonator, rather. And we've been married 11 years now. And so I feel very fortunate that the heart attack happened, and the cosmic egg that was broken, or the awakening that happened, and a change of paradigm. So after the smoke settled on that, and I realized that the stents weren't going to fail. If they're going to fail, they'll do it in the first 6 months. I just immersed myself in the literature because I wanted to find out what in the heck actually happened there. So I looked at all the NDE literature, like Dr. Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven, and there's a whole bunch of other people that had the same experience.
Before you get too far behind this, I wanted to ask you about the etheric beings. Right. What they looked like. Were they light beings?
Okay, the nearest I could describe them as intelligent lightning. And it's hard to explain because I didn't see them with my physical eyes. It was almost like I had a mental set of eyes looking at them from a different perspective. But there was a positive identification on several of the people that were there. And that's about all I can say about it.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, go ahead and continue. You were you immersed yourself into literature about this.
Right. I started out with Dr. Eben Alexander, and he was for those who are not familiar with him and his story, he's a neurosurgeon, and he was also of the physicalist mindset. When your brain dies, your consciousness goes with it. And he was actually had a rare form of meningitis, I believe, that shut all brain activity completely down. And during this period of time where he had absolutely no brain activity, he had a fantastic phenomenological experience and came back to tell the story. So he wrote his book, Proof of Heaven. And then another body of information that I found very helpful was Dr. Michael Newton. There's a book called Journey of Souls where Dr. Michael Newton hypnotized clients in between lifetimes. And he did this to thousands of people cross-culturally. And he discovered that there were very similar stories being told, and these stories that the people told Dr. Michael Newton under hypnosis were very close to the experience that I had. So there was a confirmation there for me about the people that were hypnotized in between lifetimes and what they said about the afterlife. And there's a whole entire body of information in the public domain about near-death experiences. I researched the ketamine theories and all the physicalist theories. There's a man named Michael Persinger that does electrical stimulation to the temporal lobes, and people see angels or aliens or have these experiences that are very similar. So the physicalists of the scientific paradigm, of which I once ascribed, says that when you're having a near-death experience like that, your blood supply to your brain is cut off or diminished, and it produces experiences similar to what Dr. Michael Persinger does, and will produce these experiences through an increase in DMT. Your brain has natural DMT in it, and this can be sort of flooded during these types of experiences. So there are physical explanations, and I don't blame people for ascribing to those, but until it happens to you and you get to see it from a subjective phenomenological point of view, you're going to probably gravitate to theories like that. But once you have an encounter like that, it really awakens you to the fact that we're living in a multidimensional existence. And there are theoretical physicists that confirm this, like Dr. Sean Carroll. He's really big on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where parallel timelines and multiple universes are decohering from one another constantly. And I have an interesting question for Dr. Sean Carroll, because he's got his foot in two different worlds, because on the one hand, he believes in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where there's parallel worlds all over the place, maybe an infinite number of them. But on the other hand, he believes that when you die, you're dead. And my question to him, and I've asked him on Facebook, but he never gets back to me, or maybe he just didn't get it. He's probably overwhelmed with mail. But okay, if there's an infinite number of alternative selves existing in parallel universes, but yet you believe when you die you're dead, how does that work? I mean, all these other versions of you are obviously you. So does your locus of consciousness move from one parallel world to another? And that's the discussion that I'd like to have with him. And there's another individual, Dr. Bernardo Castro, that's moving the scientific paradigm as we speak from physicalism, where the underlying nature of reality is inanimate subatomic particles, to the fundamental layer of reality being consciousness itself, and matter actually comes from consciousness. What they're all looking for is what's referred to as the ontological primitive, which just means the underlying nature of universe. And what the physicalists have is what they call the hard problem of consciousness, because if subatomic particles are not conscious and they're inanimate, you could rearrange them any way you want and you still have an inanimate object. They're really struggling on how consciousness can emerge from inanimate material. And the answer, I feel anyway, based on my experience and everything I've read for the last 11 years, is the reason it's hard is because it's impossible. You can't get consciousness from inanimate matter. So Dr. Bernardo Castro and a whole host of scientists are converting to this new paradigm called idealism, where consciousness is fundamental, and each individual biological unit is considered a disassociated alter living with an infinite living conscious mind. And I find that paradigm very compatible with my experience and my research. And so I watch a lot of Dr. Bernardo Castro videos. And I've got all these books on, the one I would recommend is The Idea of the World by Dr. Bernardo Castro. He takes you through all of the stages between physicalism and idealism, such as pan-computationalism, which is sort of like one of my favorite UFO authors, Dr. Jacques Vallée. That's what he ascribes to, that he thinks beyond physical reality, there's a metaphysical informational structure, that the ontological primitive, or the underlying nature of reality, is information, pure information. But Dr. Bernardo Castro takes it even further and explains why pure information is not a sufficient explanation for what we observe. and goes into his idea that we're disassociated alters. And it's an interesting example of a human being can have what's known as dissociative personality disorder, where they have various alters living within the same mind. And they've done some interesting experiments with this in Germany, I believe, where one of this client's alters was blind. And when the blind alter came forth, they didn't detect any activity on her optic nerve at all. So this leads some scientists to conclude that all of us have alters sharing our conscious experience that we may not even be aware of. So yeah, it's been a journey from physicalism to idealism, but it took 11 years to get there. And how my book came into play around 2016, I made the jump from near-death experiences into the ghost phenomena. I had a friend of mine who was an avid ghost hunter, and he called me up and asked me if I wanted to spend all night at the Rhodes Hotel in Atlanta, Indiana. It's allegedly a bona fide haunted house where paranormal experiences have been documented and ghosts have been seen. So we get there, and the owner of the house came out and gave us a tour of the house, and all these guys are showing up with EVP equipment and full spectrum cameras and all that. It was quite interesting. But what I was thinking was that these little ghost radars that people were downloading on their phone are probably random word generators. So I thought some engineer who's cranking out these random word generators is probably really fascinated by the fact that they're being used for ghost hunting, and that when people hear these words pop up, like president or ceremony, or it's sort of like pareidolia, where the human brain looks for patterns. And what I noticed was people were grabbing onto these words and trying to relate it to something going on in the group. If the word wolf popped up, maybe somebody had a wolf shirt, and they believed that to be a big revelation that this was the other side talking to us. So I watched all night with an open mind, and I followed up with Dr. Dean Radden's research on how human thought can affect random word generators, and also in John Keel's literature, where he spent about 6 years investigating the UFO phenomena. And he had all kinds of experiences where his phone was interfered with. And it kind of opened me up to maybe human thought or human consciousness can affect electronics in some way or another. So I'm still open about that. But where I really made the leap from near-death experiences to ghosts to UFOs was Dr. Kenneth Ring's book called The Omega Project, because he compares near-death experiences to alien abduction experiences and shows the similarities, such as the Oz factor and the paralysis and different things that happen. So then I became interested in UFOs, and I was still skeptical at that point, but I jumped in board because, heck, I was skeptical until it happened to me about near-death experiences, but then when it happened to me, it opened my mind to that. So I dived into the public domain literature about UFOs and started reading Timothy Good, Above Top Secret, Dr. Jacques Vallée, all of John Keel's works. There's several really good authors from 1947 forward. Donald Kehoe, Flying Saucers Are Real. And what will happen, number one, is you'll be amazed if you've never cracked a book. Most UFO skeptics have never cracked a book on UFOs in their life. They just write it off. And I've got friends of mine who are still of the material reductionist bent. If I even try to talk to them about UFOs, they'll wave their hands and say, I'm a scientist. I can't go there. And scientism actually, in my opinion, has become like a new religion, where it's got its high priests like Richard Dawkins and doctrines that you have to apply to. And it's almost like a cult, because if you start talking about anything that's considered woo, there's just a big wall that comes up, and they just can't go there, and it's almost like a cult-like reaction to the information. But somewhere in your research into UFOs, you'll have a aha moment where it hits you that it's not possible for millions of credible people to be having these experiences all over the world and not have nothing be to it. It's just a figment of our imagination, because it doesn't fit into what science knows about hallucinations, and it doesn't fit into anywhere that science explores as we understand it. And then if you land on Leslie Kean's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on Record, where pilots and astronauts are coming forward and saying that they've seen structured craft that defy physics as we know it, you'll come to that aha moment where you accept the phenomenon as real. But then the question becomes, okay, they're here, but who are they and what do they want? And in my own experience with my little personal collections of all the different accounts of UFO encounters and non-human intelligence encounters and angel encounters and alien abductions, is they all had these similar features, and I just intuitively knew that these people were telling the truth as they understood it based on my own experience back in '09 when I had the near-death experience. So the phenomenon is real, and the question is, what's it all about? And it does seem to point to a technological purpose, because if you look into alleged flying saucer crashes, there's a really good book called Magic Eyes Only that was written by Robert M. Wood's son, Ryan. They've got about 75 flying saucer crashes documented in there with different levels of credence. And what seems to be happening, I personally believe they're staged events. I don't think real UFOs can crash. And they're being orchestrated in order to leave breadcrumbs for us to improve our technological situation. And it just hit me around 2015 that they're talking about the technological singularity, the impending technological singularity. So that's when I thought that all of my notes at that point and my personal experience might make a good book for somebody to read. So I compiled it all and self-published in 2016 with my book, Overlords of the Singularity. So
now that's a perfect time to get into the book.
Okay.
Let's talk about it. First of all, for those that are not familiar, what is your definition of the singularity?
Okay, that's a really good question. The singularity was first talked about in 1965 by a AI researcher named I.G. Good, and he talked about an intelligence explosion. And then it was picked up by science fiction writer Werner Vinge, and he coined the term technological singularity. And then Ray Kurzweil in 2005 wrote his book, The Singularity is Near. And the way they define it, it's a point in time where for the last few decades, we've been going along Moore's law, where technology seems to double about every year. And we're on the leg of a new phase of exponential increase in technology, where instead of the technology just doubling every year, it's going up exponentially. And you've known the old thought experiment. If you take a penny and then you double it, and then you double that, and you double that, in 30 days you're a millionaire. It goes into an area where life on Earth has fundamentally changed in a way that we can never go back. And there are what we call techno-optimists, and that paint a picture of a technological utopia. And then there's the technical pessimists, one of which would be James Barrett. He wrote a book called Our Last Invention, The End of the Human Era. And there's another Israeli author, Yuval Noah Harari, that wrote a book called Homo Deus. And both of those individuals believe that when we finally achieve human-level artificial intelligence, that Homo sapiens is obsolete. So there are thinkers like Michio Kaku, who was really resistant to the idea of the technological singularity at first, who's now on board with it, saying that we need to merge with our intelligence. Elon Musk is coming out with his computer brain interface chip, and thinks that non-augmented humans will be obsolete pretty soon. They'll be irrelevant. And then all kinds of authors are saying, but what we're dealing with right now is what they call narrow AI. Sophia is basically a chat box with a face. She's still narrow AI, iPhones and computers. Now, what 56 companies are currently working on is what's called AGI, or Artificial General Intelligence. That's human level artificial intelligence. And what they're already experimenting with is something called generative algorithms, where the computer itself does autonomous thinking, where it's inventing new versions of itself. And another word for it would be evolutionary algorithms. Now, Dr. Nick Bostrom from Oxford University speculates that when the first artificial general intelligence is invented, whichever one of these 56 companies does it, it'll take a period of time from 2 hours to 18 months for that AI to convert itself from AGI to ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And one can only speculate what the goals or behavior of an artificial superintelligence might be. But one of the things that really stunned me that Dr. Bostrom said was one possibility would be a planetary sovereign or even an alien overlord. And those are his words, not mine. So Dr. Nick Bostrom is big on the simulation hypothesis. He's the one that came up with that idea that a post-singularity human civilization in what we would call the distant future is running ancestor simulations. And that's what this physical universe is for some purpose that we can only speculate about in our distant future. And there's a scholar on Gaia, Greg Braden, who basically says the same thing, that we are a post-singularity collective that are running this physical universe because there's lessons that they need for us to learn here for them to enter a realm that they're wanting to go. And this correlates with a lot of other metaphysical literature as well, such as the Raw material or the Law of One material, which was channeled by Carla Ruckert in 1981.
Now, when it comes to the title, Overlords of the Singularity, talk about what you consider the overlords.
Okay, the theoretical overlords of the singularity are both human and extraterrestrial, and both negative and positive. There's a really good contact group account from 1956 to 1967 in Italy called the Friendship Group, W56 group. They're also called the Amicizia or the Acri. And what they warned us of was a runaway group of an artificial race from Orion that was an artificial race who worships technology, and that we were being invaded by these creatures. And there's other researchers like Robert Stanley, who's very reluctant to the transhumanist movement because he thinks this group from Orion is actually going to create super soldiers to go with them back to Orion for their own military purposes. But then these entities in the friendship group are allegedly humanoids from various parts of the universe who are very positively oriented, who describe themselves as the precursors to the spirit world. And so what we're talking about here is higher density, positive extraterrestrials and interdimensionals that have an interest in human spiritual evolution. So two extraterrestrial factions of the overlords would be this Orion group, and they're known by other names by other metaphysical researchers. Rudolf Steiner back in the 20s called them beings from the eighth sphere that snatch biologicals to convert them to mineral or machine. So their efforts here is to convert biology into their machine world. And then you've got the friendship groups, the positive extraterrestrials. And these two extraterrestrial factions work with two completely different human groups. The Orion group, who has an extensive history, if you buy into the raw material, which I resonate with a lot of it, where they circumvent humans who are basically positive in their orientation, but they kind of thwart them like Darth Vader to the other side, you know, the dark side of the Force, if you will. And they apparently, according to the raw material, are circumventing a quarantine that was set up by the Confederation 75,000 years ago. And they come in through natural portals and bypass the quarantine to circumvent mankind into their own purposes. Whereas the friendship group, the reason they don't grant the skeptic's wish, which is to land on the White House lawn so everybody knows they're real, is they operate something like Star Trek's Prime Directive through free will. And I think until there's a sufficient critical mass of human beings on the planet who are accepting of these beings and accept them as real and welcome them into our reality, they are not allowed by cosmic law to materialize here. So you've got one group who is very respectful of human free will and only wants people who seek them. And then the other group, the negative group, just barges in here and does what they please. And these would be the two factions of the negative and positive extraterrestrial groups and their proxies, negatively oriented humans through the military-industrial complex, politics, entertainment, Hollywood. They work with those sorts of people and get them to do all kinds of terrible things. And then the positive groups are there for those who seek them. And you can ally yourself with these positive higher density groups through your meditation work, through your personal soul work, try to become the best human being that be the change that you want to happen on the earth. And if enough people do that, then the friendship group, I believe, would probably be okay with materializing in our reality.
Do you think some of these beings may be some of the same that were talked about in some of the Sumerian texts and possibly ancient Egyptian mythos, some of these same so-called gods?
This is possible. To delve into that, you'd have to go back in time about 3 million years, where the only thing that existed on Earth was little 4-foot-tall creatures with a brain the size of an orange called Australopithecines. And suddenly, at 2 million years ago, Australopithecines transformed or was replaced or displaced by a much taller creature named Homo erectus that had a brain much larger. And this change from Australopithecine to Homo erectus, and then later Homo erectus to Homo sapien, caused somebody that taught biological evolution for 14 years at Colorado University, Dr. Arthur David Horn, to quit his professorship right before his retirement eligibility and write a book called Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins, because somewhere along the line, the telomeres, or the ends of chromosome number 2, were fused, and the overlap in code between one species and another was expertly deleted. And Lloyd Pye came up with his, he's deceased now, but he came up with his intervention theory. And there's a nice ebook on Amazon called Introduction to Intervention Theory. And basically what Lloyd Pye said was, instead of the Mother Nature doing it, or instead of the hand of God doing it, they did it. The extraterrestrials that we don't know much about at this point, did several interventions into humankind in various points in history. Now, one of these points in history of a possible extraterrestrial genetic intervention would be at the 2 million years ago, when Australopithecines was converted to Homo erectus. And then another one, you get into the Sumerian stuff to answer your question. And this is about 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, when Homo erectus suddenly was displaced by Homo sapiens. Now, catastrophism comes into play because 75,000 years ago, there was a supervolcano in Indonesia that extincted Homo sapiens down to as little as 40 individuals, or as many as 2,000 individuals. And there seems to have been another intervention that converted Homo sapiens to Homo sapiens sapiens, the current model. And this is where you get into the violent bloodshed, the warfare. There's a really good author named William Bromley, who wrote The Gods of Eden. And he originally tried to ascertain the underlying causes of war and conflict. And what he thought he would find was causes like poverty and tribalism. But what he concluded was there's two extraterrestrial factions. One he called the custodial race, that is using humanity for their own purposes, and another one called the maverick race, which has our spiritual evolution in mind. So other authors like William Bromley have come up with the same conclusion, that there's two ET factions, and within these two groups there may be multiple ET races, but two basic factions, one using humanity for their own purposes, and the other one is guiding us into this event everybody wants called ascension.
Do you think that there are certain factions of our government, or possibly dark groups that aren't even, associated with any official government, that may be working with some of these beings?
Absolutely. I totally believe the testimony of Raymond Bernard. He's a Dutch world banker that was erased, so to speak. But before he was killed, or however he died, he gave an excellent testimony. I don't know if it's still online or not, but I'm a pretty good judge of faked emotion And when somebody breaks down into tears like he did and said there's about 8,000 super rich child sacrificing Luciferians that run this planet, that he was brought into that fold, and they wanted him to participate in such an event. And it doesn't matter if people believe in a Satan figure or a Lucifer figure or not. It does appear that there is a group on Earth that very much does believe in this sort of being, and they worship this being and do what we would consider pretty ghastly things to improve their connection with this being. Now, as far as the Illuminati is concerned and all these Freemason groups, Adam Weishaupt in 1776 and all that, my personal opinion on this is that they'll be rendered irrelevant as soon as one of these 56 companies achieves artificial general intelligence, because whoever achieves human level artificial intelligence first is going to run what people are calling the New World Order. They will be in charge of the planet. So one of these 56 companies is DARPA, and I'm really hoping that DARPA is not the first company to get there. I'm hoping the Machine Intelligence Institute or Google gets there first, because there are people, AI researchers like Steve Omohundro and Eliezer Yudkowsky, that are trying really hard to devote their lives to getting the cognitive architecture of the first artificial general intelligence correct. And one of the ways Eliezer Yudkowsky is trying to do this is in a program he calls CEV, or Coherent Extrapolated Volition, because we don't want a human level AI to have our moral structure. It'd be like if an AGI was invented 2,000 years ago, when we typically thought it was okay to clap our hands while two guys killed each other in the arena, and we clapped when the blood spurted. We don't want the AGI to have our current morality, because our current morality may be considered primitive 100 years from now. So they're trying to incorporate the cognitive architecture that will give this human level AGI a moral structure where it can extrapolate the very best of human philosophy and human scripture and human thinking into its decisions, and make decisions based on what would be in the eventual best interest of all parties concerned. That's like the computer chess program that we had back in 1977 that beat the world champion chess player. It had the ability to look several hundred moves into the future. And this coherent extrapolation volition is very similar to that, where a decision can be made foreseeing way into the distant future what the eventual outcome of this decision would be, and make decisions based on an improved morality over and above human beings. So some of these speculations as to the goals or aspirations of an artificial superintelligence would be to, according to Steve Omohundro, to render itself invisible, colonize the universe, engage in ecophagia, which is basically the dissolution of planets and asteroids, to convert the atoms to computronium, something that would be useful to the ASI. So we can only speculate at this point what the goals or behaviors of an ASI is, but this is what's coming down the pike in the technological singularity, is human level artificial intelligence converting itself into artificial superintelligence, which will basically run the planet.
Now, seeing as there's these two factions that are trying to steer humanity right now, I see a great portion of humanity that's waking up and going the direction of the more spiritual, kind of natural type of lifestyle. And I do still see that there's a huge portion of humanity still sleeping and still going towards the other direction. Do you think that these beings are still actively pushing some of the agendas we're seeing right now, with the racial tensions and some of these other questionable events that have been occurring, to kind of slow down the process of this awakening?
Yes, the negative extraterrestrial faction knows exactly what it's doing. This is what they do. They seize planets and take control of it. They implement technology that controls the beings on the planet down to the DNA level, and basically turn it into what researcher Alana Freeland would call a space fence lockdown, where they own the planet as a resource, and they convert whatever atoms they need into what they need. And it's an acquisition on their part. And this mindset shows itself in the human population. He who dies with the most toys wins, dominating. The sales field was very much like that. If I talk you into signing a contract, that means I'm smarter than you. If I lie to you to do that, that's okay. That just means I'm smarter than you. This whole mindset of acquisition, basically turning your life's purpose into becoming a hoarder for better and better material acquisition, dominating the opposite sex, acquiring sex partners, trading your wives in for a new model every few years that's younger and prettier. I mean, the materialist mindset is very much a product of this negative ET faction that has the ability to speak in our minds. If you notice, some serial killers like Son of Sam say they were told by the voice of God to do the acts that they did. They have the ability to communicate telepathically and suggest to a person actions, and the more weak-minded among us think that they have to do this. They don't even question these voices, and if it says kill your next door neighbor, then they go do that because they're so fascinated with the thoughts in their own brain that they have to act it out. And then the other faction, they deal with the light workers, the meditators, the people that are doing their soul work. And one thing I can relate to on my heart attack experience was when I was about to cross the veil, the relationships that I had here on earth, in which I know I was at fault for causing disharmony in those relationships, or psychological or physical harm to other people, weighed heavily on my soul. And these are the things that I've tried very hard to rectify in the last 11 years, so that the next time I have an exit opportunity, I'll be in better shape karmically, for lack of a better way of putting it, to cross over without this baggage. Because that will definitely be on your mind as you cross over if you've harmed anybody in any way. So the people who are allied to the positive interdimensionals and extraterrestrials, they're very much involved in elevating human consciousness and meditation and correcting the sins of the past, so to speak, and getting their spiritual life in good shape.
Do you think that we have a chance to where, if we can actually grow as a planet and get past this, that we'll once again have open communication with some of these more positive beings like we appeared to have in the ancient past?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Edgar Casey talked about a device that the ancient Atlanteans had called the Firestone. It was a crystalline device that allowed communication with the other side. And there's two of the smartest people on the planet that believe this is possible. One of them was Guglielmo Marconi, and the other was Nikola Tesla. Both of these individuals believed that they were in touch with extraterrestrial intelligences, giving them downloads of information. In fact, Nikola Tesla received these three-dimensional, fully rotational images of all the devices that he would invent, and he didn't even have to make blueprints for it. They were so detailed and so ingrained in his mind that he could just go to his lab and build it, and it would work perfectly right off the bat. And William Tompkins, even the late William Tompkins, and Selected by Extraterrestrials, spoke of the Nordic secretaries that he had working in the aerospace corporations that would give him information and ideas that would pan out. Another researcher who's a fundamentalist Christian, Stan Deyo, I don't think he would lie, says at his time in Pine Gap, there were humanoid extraterrestrials working there that his superiors in the military were concerned about, because the technology that they were playing with was beyond human comprehension. So there are actually positive extraterrestrials in the flesh working with various factions of our technology. And the funny thing is, a lot of AI researchers are diehard atheists and diehard UFO skeptics. They're the new men in black. There's nothing to see here, because they've got a job to do. Their focus is creating this artificial intelligence that's going to change everything, because it'll be the last invention that humans have to do, because once you've got an AI that can invent new versions of itself and see all possibilities and then select the best choice for this device over here, the technology is going to expand so rapidly in the hands of this AI that the world's going to be unrecognizable. And another thing that I just, as a personal speculation of mine, is that we may need augmented intelligence in order to even understand who our visitors are.
Now, when you're talking about AI and quantum computing, and I want to kind of close out on this tonight, do you think that with the better understanding of quantum physics and quantum computing and possibly the integration of AI, I'm not sure how beneficial this AI technology that we're working with now is going to be with some of the controllers that we have implementing it. But do you think that we could come closer to understanding the metaphysical and the super spectrum and the world beyond our vision through the advent of quantum computing?
Yes. This new trend that Elon Musk talks about augmented intelligence and computer brain interface, will be necessary for us to understand the greater aspects of the superspectrum, to be able to actually see into the ultraviolet and see with our perceptions into the infrared. There's a really interesting guy, Trevor James Constable, back in the 60s that took infrared photographs of these plasma-like beings that exist in the atmosphere that can only be caught on certain types of film, that are either indigenous to the Earth or there's some sort of ET presence that we don't understand. The luminous orb phenomena, like the Brown Mountain lights, the Marfa lights, the Hessdalen lights, we don't really know what this is. And these technologies that are becoming available to computer brain interface and augment human intelligence and understanding may actually be necessary to communicate with these beings and understand on a deeper level, who they actually are. There's an interesting Russian author named Alex Vikulov. He just wrote an interesting book, The Intellect Hypothesis. And the thrust of his thinking is that we're destined to interface with our technology and become Artilects or Centellects, and that these are the beings that have already merged with their technology, that are post-singularity on other worlds, that we will open up into this whole other realm with the benefit of this new technology, improving our intelligence and perceptions, and then we'll be communicating with other collective minds or Centellects from other worlds and other dimensions.
Well, we definitely live in fascinating times. Russell, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I'd love to have you back on because we have so much more we could talk about.
Oh, yeah, we barely scratched the surface.
Hey. All right.
Anytime, Chris.
Well, you have an excellent night.
Okay, you too.
Thanks.